Hello class, how are you doing today? Today we're going to talk about deviance. For a lot of us, we find this topic to be very interesting, and it's kind of a fun topic to talk about. So we're going to start with what is deviance. Reminding you this is chapter 6, and of course the PowerPoints lectures coincide with the book. So you can follow along in the book or listen to the lecture and read beforehand, whatever you like to do. So what is deviance? Essentially, deviance refers to a violation of norms, and we talked about norms before as everyday interactions or rules for everyday interactions in our society. What is notable about deviance is the fact that it's not the act itself, like most people would presume. Deviance is actually the reaction to the act. So what we talk about when we talk about deviance in my classes that are on campus is we use this example of peeing in the shower. Now, based on research, and yes, somebody actually did research on this, the question was asked, do you pee in the shower? Now, I'm not going to tell you the answer to the question just yet, but I'm going to ask you, do you think peeing in the shower is a deviant act or is it not a deviant act? Well, usually by show of hands, which we can't do today, we tend to find out that about half of the population thinks it's deviant and about half of the population doesn't. And coinciding with how many people actually pee in the shower, about half of the population pees in the shower and about half the population doesn't. Now, when we talk about this as a form of deviance, if about half the population pees in the shower, is it a deviant act? Because remember, based on the definition of deviance, deviance is the reaction to the act, not the act. So peeing in the shower is relative. It's only deviant if you feel it's deviant or if someone else believes it's deviant. If you do not think it's deviant, if there is no reaction to it, then it would not be considered deviant behavior. So let's talk about this in terms of, a couple other, let's use a couple other examples to understand how deviance is really the reaction to the act. Keep in mind that when, as sociologists, we're talking about deviance in terms of how we are describing a specific, what's the word I'm looking for? We're describing whether somebody is conforming to the particular society that they live in or not conforming to the particular society they're living in. We're not labeling this person. This is not about whether this is good or bad, right or wrong. This is not a value judgment. It's simply talking about and describing a particular situation within society. So crime, known as deviance in our society because it's the breaking of enacted law, right, which would be more along the lines with mores in our society, right? Values and mores are more strictly held in our society. And for the most part, when you commit crime, you are considered to be deviant. However, even in our society, certain types of crimes are not considered necessarily as deviant as other types of crimes. So when we look at the crime of murder, this would be considered highly deviant behavior because more people tend to have a negative reaction to it. If you compare that to the crime of smoking on an airplane, although considered deviant, you would not be considered as deviant as if you had committed the crime of murder. And even considering that, if you look at an example like profiteering in China versus America, in the United States, people like Donald Trump actually, talk about their exploits of profiteering. Profiteering is making a huge profit on a deal. Whereas in China, this is considered not only to be deviant, but it's considered to be a crime that's punishable by a public display of basically flogging, right? So it's not the behavior itself, and that's something that we're trying to talk about today. And I'm trying to express to you that deviance is not about your behavior. It's not even necessarily about anything that you do at all. It's about the reaction to you as a person or to what you do. And you can see this with sexuality from one culture to another. Whereas sexuality in one culture, a specific form of sexuality in one culture would be considered highly deviant, in another culture it's not. So if you look at a highly patriarchal society, having the women in the heterosexual relationships actually enjoying sex, or even receiving or enjoying sex, or even achieving orgasm, is not only acceptable but the norm in these highly patriarchal societies. Whereas with the book and what they talk about in terms of a norm or sexual behavior for this particular group, not only is it important that the woman enjoys sex, but that she receives orgasm, or she accomplishes orgasms as well as the man. And if she does not, the man actually could be essentially publicly flogged, and is considered to be highly deviant and needs to conform to that expectation in this society. So why do we have deviance if it's not really about behavior? Well, it's about making behavior predictable. It's about social order. And because we're looking for at least some degree of social order in any society, we have both positive and negative sanctions. So positive sanctions are, and I think we've talked about this already when we were talking about norms, but positive sanctions are the positive type of reaction that you receive when you conform to the socialization of your society. And negative sanctions are the negative types of responses that you receive when you don't conform. So for example, with on page 155, when we're talking about human sexuality and cross-cultural perspective, they use a negative sanction for the husband if he doesn't conform to the expectation of sexual pleasure for both the wife and the husband. So you can have both positive and negative sanctions to make people conform into the society in which they live. And we do this every single day in every way, shape, and form. In addition to that, going back just a second to kind of stigma, we create stigmas for individuals and groups within our society that discredit people or stigmatize them, create a sense of deviance for this individual. And it doesn't even have to do with anything they've actually done. Sometimes it can have to do with the way that they look. It can have to do with health, or behavior in terms of mental health, that type of thing. And so it's not necessarily behavior. It can be appearance. It can be a person having some type of impairment that can create a stigma and mean that that person is considered deviant for that society. We do see this with the cleft palate occasionally in some cultures, where the child would be stigmatized and ostracized and pushed out of the society. They're not brought into and not allowed to be part of that community or that society. Other children wouldn't play with them. As adults, they wouldn't be able to move into the workforce. They would be considered deviant. And this is through no act or behavior of their own. So there's several different theories of deviance. Talking first about symbolic interactionist perspective, which is micro or macro. Do you know? It's a micro level perspective that we react according to how we interpret situations. So when we talk about symbolic interactionist perspective in terms of deviance, we are reacting to our interpretation, our ethnocentric perspective, our cultural bias, our understanding of the world, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So again, going back to the definition of deviance, remember it's the reaction to the act and not necessarily the act itself. So understanding your own cultural perspective can allow you to understand what is considered to be deviant and why, or why you may perceive something to be deviant, whereas somebody standing next to you would not necessarily perceive it to be different. Differential association theory is a little bit different. This is learning to conform and deviate to the dominant culture. So this term, coined by Edwin Sutherland, shows how we can be different from other groups or associate with them. But basically, it's that we, as a society, are giving messages constantly about what it means to conform to the dominant culture and what it means to deviate from the dominant culture. And things can fall in kind of gray areas. So if we talk about something like like a biker gang, and we talk about conforming to the dominant culture, on the face, we often think of a biker gang as being deviant from the dominant culture. They're outlaws, they're rebels. But to a certain extent, for American culture, being in a biker gang is in part conforming to the dominant culture, because for our own American culture, to be a rebel, to find your own path, to be independent, is part of our culture, just like gun culture is part of our culture. So we learn to both conform and to deviate from our dominant culture in a way that allows us to function within that culture at the same time. So I'm going to let you go here so that this doesn't come to take too long for one particular video, and next we'll be talking about control theory.